Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar today, hosted by Green Communities Canada. The title of the webinar, Dirty Drop-Off, Children's Exposure to Air Pollutants at School. So welcome. We're really pleased to have Dr. Matt Adams today, who's going to be giving a presentation on this, a really important topic. So that should last for about 30 minutes of the presentation, and then we've got time at the end for questions and answers. So if you have any questions, please use the chat box, send your message to everyone, and we'll be tracking those during the presentation. We're going to be keeping everyone on mute throughout the presentation, so please be respectful of that. Okay, so this webinar is hosted by Green Communities Canada. We're a national association of community organisations that work to reduce our impact on the environment. We've been a leading organisation promoting active school travel since 1996, and we do this through research, advocacy, training, education resources, events, partnerships, and on-the-ground programming. So we have lots going on. My name is Kate Berry. I'm the Senior Programme Manager for our Ontario Active School Travel Programme. I'm a civil engineer, and I've got a background in traffic management, and I'm also a mother of a small child. So this topic of vehicle air pollution is a great personal and professional interest to me.
Hi everyone, my name is Selena Churro. I'm the project coordinator for Ontario Active School Travel. And this topic is of particular interest to me because I come from an environmental science and geography background. I've worked on numerous projects trying to understand human perceptions of active and sustainable modes. So Dr. Matt Adams' research findings really show how idling not only affects the environment, but also our health. So I'm looking forward to hearing more.
Great, thank you. And really just as an introduction, I have a few slides. Our goal for the Ontario Active School Travel Programme is simple. We want to make walking, cycling and other forms of active and sustainable transportation the norm for school trips. And we're fortunate and thrilled to have support from the Ontario government, who provided Green Communities Canada with $3.5 million over 3 years to take active school travel to the next level in the province of Ontario. So just a couple more things that I wanted to highlight before we get started. Green Communities Canada has adopted Ontario Active School Travel as the name for our program to promote walking and wheeling on the school journey. So we just launched a new website domain, ontarioactiveschooltravel.ca, and in parallel that we've launched new social media channels on Twitter and Facebook. So please be sure to follow us online. We do have a couple of prizes available, so we've got a little contest there. The first 2 people to tag us at Ontario AST, we have a couple of copies of a new children's book, The Yellow Bicycle, that we will send to those. So please keep in touch, stay in the loop, and follow us for news and updates. And then the last thing that I just wanted to plug really is we're very excited. Bike to School Week is 6 weeks away, and for the first time ever, this event and this campaign is open to all schools in Ontario to register as participants and benefit from the resources and the prizes that are available. The campaign is organised by Cycle Toronto and CultureLink with financial support from Metrolinx and Ontario Active School Travel Programme. So please, if you're in Ontario, encourage schools in your part of the province to register and participate and celebrate their Bike to School Week events. Okay, so I'll hand over to Selena to introduce our presenter today.
All right, so our presenter is Dr. Matthew Adams. He is an assistant professor at the University of Toronto Mississauga in the Department of Geography. His research examines the intersection between human activity with a focus on the transportation system and environmental pollutants generation and exposure, relying on geospatial technologies that include computer modeling, GIS, GPS technology, and remote sensing. Dr. Adams' primary focus is modeling individuals' exposure to air contaminants in the urban environment. Research outputs cross between the social and natural sciences, leveraging and advancing spatial analysis and statistical techniques. So now I'll pass on the webinar to Dr. Matt Adams. And just a reminder, if you have any questions throughout this presentation, please include them in the chat box.
All right, thank you for that introduction, Selena and Kate. I hope everyone can hear me all right. Let me just sharing my screen here. I believe that should be working now. If it's not, someone just let me know. I do notice that in the participants box, we have a go faster, go slower. If you want me to slow down, feel free to use those. This is my first webinar, so I'm used to talking with people and being able to see their faces to kind of keep my pace, but we will bear with me as we go through this. As Selena mentioned, I'll just talk briefly about what my research looks at. So I'm really interested in aspects of the urban environment and the built environment and how that can affect and generate air pollution. So someone's air pollution exposure we understand can be highly variable depending on where and how they move through the urban environment. For example, someone who a lot of my research has looked in the city of Hamilton, who works in the industrial core of Hamilton and commutes there on the major highway, are going to have very different air pollution exposures to someone who, walks to work, in more of the suburban region. And we try to understand all of these different aspects because we realize that it's no longer viable just to estimate exposure for all individuals within a city, because we know that those health effects are often localized and very dependent on what people are actually doing and how what their lifestyle is like. So I will now get into some of this work. So as Selena mentioned, I'm at the University of Toronto now. My research is carrying on there. A lot of this work I had started when I was at the McMaster Institute for Transportation and Logistics. So that's where we got started on this work, and it's continuing on. I'm actually going to be at the very end talking about some potential opportunities to collaborate with hopefully some of the people who are participating in this webinar. So for this specific research, we were really interested in understanding what is happening at the school level. And, okay, someone's asking if I can make my slides smaller. Actually, I will, sorry, let me try. Okay, is that who? All right, I think that might be better. Let me know if you can see the slides now.
Hi, Matt. The slide looked good to us.
Okay, I'll go back because I don't think this will really work too well from my end.
Yeah, they looked good for us before, so.
Okay, great. Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm just going to stop sharing and start back up here. Okay. All right, so we'll get into this work. What we know, depending on the school year, students are making this trip from home to school, around 400 times. It's probably closer to about 380, but it doesn't make a tremendous difference. And what we're interested is not really the whole journey itself in this specific research. We are really interested in what happens outside of the schools where the drop-off is occurring. In our idealized situation, we have active modes of transportation for students to get to school, cycling, walking, biking. And we have lots of programs that are encouraging this. But what we do see is that these rates just continue to fall or have been falling for the last few decades. And that the actual situation of how students are getting to school tends to look something a bit more like this. Personal vehicles, bus transportation, public transportation in the larger cities as well. Now, in front of the school. Now, when you look at this, and we have two pictures here. Here is kind of what the setup in the bottom right looks like. It's a drop-off area at a school, kind of often known as a kiss and ride program. So vehicles will pull into the school, and many of you are probably quite familiar with this, stop at a, where that stop sign is. There would be a teacher or someone from the school there as well, and let their child out of the car. Now, in an idealized situation, this would happen fairly quickly, and it would work very smoothly. As we started to get to know what was going on here and started observing what was going on, it became very clear that this process is somewhat slow. It's quite slow. You tend to get a lot of vehicles backing up. And this is sort of our initial reasoning why we got interested in this work, is because we wanted to know, this kind of stop and go driving that's occurring right in front of the school, is there any potential effects to air quality or local air quality? And as we dug into it, it's actually quite interesting. I was, searching the internet for any different types of media that was on this, and there's a lot of very this causes a lot of anger with a lot of parents. These drop-off programs, from what we learned, tended to be very inefficient. Parents spent long times waiting and idling in them. It represents a stop and go driving condition that you would deal with when you're in congestion. And all of these came together in our head, and we started to think, well, this is something that may be generating quite significant localized air pollution concentrations as this very localized source. And we knew that when we look at our air pollution monitoring network in Ontario or throughout most of North America, we don't have the number of monitors to capture a localized source such as this. Just having a little trouble clicking through my slides here, so just bear with me. We looked at one pollutant in particular here, which is known as particulate matter. This is not a specific pollutant, but it's kind of any of the particles that are in the air that you would inhale. And we were looking at PM 2.5. So specifically, that is particulates that are in the air that are smaller than 2.5 microns. In the bottom right image, you can kind of get an understanding for that. In the background there, you see a human hair, and human hair is about 50 to 70 microns in diameter. And then we have larger particulates, which would be known as PM10 in yellow there, crossing across the human hair. And then if you look at the small blue dots here in the center, those are what we're looking at. So, very, very small particles that can get really deep into the body. It's going to be able to affect, a lot of issues that are just beyond, upper respiratory tract issues. As a background, how we measure this or report these concentrations is in micrograms per meter cubed. I'll just refer to that as sort of the concentration today. And Hamilton, where the study took place, the background or the average concentration across the year is 7.5 micrograms per meter cubed. Generally, this is not a concentration that's going to have extremely large health effects, but you will see increases of probably around 1 to 200 cases of early mortality due to this rate. In some of our other studies, we have seen these concentrations become elevated up to 600, 700, 800 micrograms per meters cubed, and that was occurring in stop and go traffic along the 400 series highways in our region. We have lots of different sources for particulate matter across Ontario. We have residential sources. A number of that occurs in the winter when we're doing wood burning for heating, as well as barbecuing and other types of fire burning activities. The transportation sector is also a major source of particulate matter. When we're looking at the risk, we know that there are a few people that are at greater risk than the general population. Those are people with existing respiratory or cardiovascular conditions, as well as the elderly, people who are working outdoors, also people who are active outdoors, and then young children. and really specifically young children with existing respiratory diseases, which we see in increasing numbers as we're progressing. Year after year, those numbers seem to keep going up. So we do know that youth or younger children are at the greatest risk. And we looked, we ended up dialing down into kindergarten play areas, and we'll kind of discuss that in a bit more detail. And, the youth are or young children are really at a greater risk because they tend to inhale more air relative to their body mass. So when we're thinking of exposure, we need to think of it in two pieces. The concentration of the pollutant that's in the air that's surrounding you, that's the ambient concentration. And then actually need to think about how much of that air you're inhaling and exposing your body to, which we'll refer to as the dose. We don't look at dose exposure in the study. We are more interested in just understanding changes to the ambient concentrations. Lots of unfortunate health effects in children. Lung function, lung development. Remember, these are young children who, when they're exposed to increased concentrations, are going to have lasting, long-term, lifelong effects, unfortunately. When we're thinking about school specifically, we do notice that children who are exposed to elevated concentrations of pollution tend to have poorer performance in school. They tend to often be more rambunctious, as well as just general cognitive decline. And then there is a very unclear issue and link to asthma. The research is headed in the direction that we believe increased air pollution exposure will increase hospital admissions and onsets of attack. However, it's been very difficult to isolate the rate of that effect because it's very difficult to estimate individual level exposure and link those to asthma onsets. So now more about the research project. I just want to make note, this was a 2-year project that we received funding from the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change. So I think I've covered this, but why did we conduct this research? Mainly, we were interested in the question, does this stop and go driving that's occurring in these kiss and ride programs, can it generate significant pollution in this localized area? Okay. Is it going to have any effect, or do these conditions not really have a notable effect? I'll begin with our initial plan before I get into what we actually had to do. Initially, we work with the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change and Dr. Dennis Kaur, who is a retired air pollution scientist now, but works as a consultant. And we've been doing a lot of mobile air pollution monitoring. So we have a large van that's equipped with the same equipment that the Ministry of the Environment uses to measure the concentrations all across Ontario. And we can move this van wherever we want and estimate concentrations of air pollution. The problem is, or what we identified as we began these surveys, is that we would notice that within minutes, or even as we set up before the drop-off began, if we had the big monitoring equipment there, people rapidly changed their behavior, and they would park away from the school, or they'd park on the side street, and they'd walk their child the remaining distance. So it turns out we weren't actually able to capture the concentrations with our original method. So I'm going to talk briefly or quickly kind of how we changed our methods to be able to estimate what was actually going on. So the first step is we had undergraduate students go and observe schools in the morning and count how many vehicles were entering each school into these drop-off programs. Now, we looked at different types of schools, schools with and schools without organized drop-offs, but we are just trying to understand in general how many vehicles are dropping off children at school, at each school. And we also looked at not just the number of vehicles, what types of vehicles were they? Were they large SUVs? Are they small compact cars? Are they trucks, vans? And then we tried to get an estimate of the vehicle age. Is this a newer car? Is it a late model car? That was a little bit more difficult to assess, but we could kind of get some idea. When we looked at these schools, we looked at 25 different elementary schools in Hamilton. We looked at them multiple times in many cases. We did notice that when we repeatedly sampled a school that there wasn't too much variation, that we'd see between 23 and 116 vehicles at a school. When we look at the breakdown, I've kind of colored this as green being the more efficient vehicles, yellow being generally less efficient, and then red being our least efficient vehicles for polluting sources. We see that about 25% are compact or economy cars. Now, why is this important? One of the things that we're very aware of is this gradual shift to the electric vehicle. And that quarter is the one best represented by vehicles that are most likely to be replaced by fully electric vehicles in somewhat of the near future. If we look at the larger piece of the pie, representing about 2/3, these are our larger, heavier, less fuel efficient vehicles, our minivans, SUVs, and a small proportion of trucks. And this makes a lot of sense. It's larger than you would expect for the general makeup of vehicles across Ontario and Canada, but it makes a lot of sense for young families. We kind of, got to the understanding that as families are expanding, they tend to get to these vehicles, SUVs and minivans, crossovers, as they get a larger family to make it easier and all of that. So we do see somewhat of a disproportionately large number of these vehicles dropping off students. So we wanted to scale this up beyond the 25 schools in Hamilton. So we built a predictive model to try to estimate how many vehicles, well, to explain first, how many vehicles were dropping off students at each school. And it turns out we looked at lots of different factors. We looked at the density, the population density around the school. We had this idea that schools located in denser neighborhoods would have fewer vehicles. We looked at the income. We had the idea that higher income neighborhoods probably have more accessibility to a vehicle. In the end, our model really only relied on school enrollment. So it was actually the enrollment of the school, regardless of these social economic factors, on how many vehicles would be dropping off a student at school, which makes it actually quite easy to expand this study across Hamilton. Here's just a map of the breakdown. So we looked at schools kind of in the traditional boundaries of Hamilton. There are a number of amalgamated cities to Hamilton. We haven't looked at those in this study because it was just difficult to observe those schools, and we have some pretty strong beliefs that they have a rural school is going to have very different rates of student transportation compared to a suburban or more urban school. Now, our estimates, we find that there are about 4,500 vehicles in Hamilton that are dropping off children at school, which is a large number of vehicles when you start thinking about it. And based on some surveys that were undertaken by Metrolinx in the past, what they found was in this region, about half of these vehicles are doing a single purpose trip. And what we mean by that is the parent is taking their student to school and then they're returning directly home. They're not going to work afterwards. They're not going to go grocery shopping. And this is important when we start thinking about, potential ways to affect policy, because we know that at least half of these people have free available time. They may be able to take some additional time to walk with their child to school. They're not constrained by their time budget. The other half of the vehicles on the road, they are constrained by their time budget. They're going to work, they're going shopping, they have other activities that are following this. When we look at it, we estimate about 52 vehicles per school, and that aligned with our observations. So at this point, what we had was some information on the number of vehicles that were dropping off students, the types of those vehicles, But that was all we were able to really observe, because unfortunately, we weren't able to get our air pollution monitoring equipment there in any way which did not affect what was going on with the student drop-off. So we saw this change in behavior as soon as we started monitoring, which is good, and I'll talk about that later, but it made it a bit more difficult for us to actually understand the concentrations and how they were being affected around the school. So what we did is with our observations, we built a traffic simulation model. So we were able to simulate the stop and go driving pattern and drop off of these vehicles as they were entering the school Kiss and Ride program. Okay. So this program, it understands how people drive. It's been developed on driving behavior at different speeds. And from that, we're able to get on information on how quickly people are accelerating, how quickly would they be slowing down, how much time are they spending idling. And we ran these simulations for a 15-minute window before school would be starting. We found that based on our observations when we were tracking how many vehicles were coming into these drop-offs, that drop-off window was around 15 minutes. That gave us information on the driving behavior. We then also had information on the number of people. We had information on the types of vehicles that they had. The EPA, at least for now, has a really great publicly available model for estimating emissions. So you can take the number of vehicles, the driving schedule, which is the behavior of idle time, rates of acceleration, and combine that with vehicle classes to estimate the emissions that would be occurring in front of the school. So we did this for each of the 83 schools that we studied. We imported their, where the school was, the location of the school, where the drop-off is, all of that information relative to the school. And we were able to estimate the particulate matter that was being generated by these drop-off programs. When we look at it, this gave us a total amount of pollution. From that, we had to figure out where that pollution was going. How is it being dispersed? You can think of it as your campfire. And when you think about your campfire, if there's no wind, the smoke's going to rise straight up. If it gets windy, and I think we've all been there, all of a sudden the wind is blowing that campfire smoke right in your face and your eyes are watering and you're trying to run away from the fire. So that's what we needed to understand. What was happening with this pollution that was being generated in front of the school? So we used what's known as a dispersion model, and we used one that's built specifically for vehicle emissions on roads. And for every school, for 5 years worth of meteorological data, we ran these dispersion models. And we estimated the concentrations, or the increase into the ambient concentration, so that's the air we're breathing, due to the drop-off program itself. And we estimated this at the drop-off location, at the main entrance to a school, and then to the school playground. These are kind of three important locations. This drop-off location, we have people standing there, we have the attendant there, this is where the students are getting out. It's the point source of the pollution. Then this front door of the school, depending on where this is, it might be being exposed to these elevated levels. And then in the morning, when this drop-off program is occurring, the students we are often observing are spending their time in the playground. So another interesting part that we wanted to understand. So we did this for 5 years. We ran this model at each of the schools, and we were able to get some information about these three locations. Now, when we look very generally at all three of these locations across all of the time periods and all of the schools, at the drop-off location, when we compare it to the background concentrations, which were about 7.5 micrograms per meter cubed of this particulate matter, we notice that the drop-off location on an average day is showing a 50% increase. So this is notable, and that's across all conditions. The schoolyard, thankfully, showed a very minimal to really no substantial increase. And as well as the school entrance, we noticed an average increase that was actually quite small. So where the students, the general population of students, should be spending their time once they get out of these vehicles or when they're walking to school in the schoolyard, they're probably not being exposed to any significant increase in pollution. However, it's not only about this average. If we have very high days, very elevated concentrations, these are the days that are going to cause short-term effects, acute health effects. And we found that during 5% of the mornings, pollution was doubling compared to the background. And we estimate a maximum increase to 177 micrograms. This is comparable to, say, standing beside a 400 series highway during rush hour, within maybe 100 meters of it. So I would consider this a high risk potential, potentially very high risk environment. Kind of have this visualization here. So each one of these represents one day of the school year. And we see that pollution, and this is specific to the drop-off and across all schools. Now, some schools are affected at much higher rates than other schools, but this is across all schools. We're going to see pollution being 4 times the background during 2 days out of the year, 3 times the background concentration 4 days, and so on. And then we can kind of see that 50% increase. So it is substantial at the drop-off location. The potential for increasing air pollution is occurring because of these vehicle drop-off programs. And this, remember, this is across all of the schools, and some schools don't fare as well. We won't get into specific schools because it really depends on the location of the school. In Hamilton, we have an escarpment, so we have a lower and an upper city. And in the lower city, we often get stagnant air due to winds coming off the lake, and they reduce the mixing of air, so those schools tend to fare a little bit more poorly. Now, all of this is important, but what I initially said, or what I just said, sorry, is that at these school drop-off areas, we have the increase in pollution, but where the students are spending their time in the school playground, we're not seeing substantial increases. And for us, we really thought, okay, well, this is good. This is really good. However, we were at a lot of schools. And one thing that we started to observe following this implementation of full-day kindergarten, we know that schools have kindergarten play areas. And how they tend to be located is actually, they're kind of co-located to the drop-off area. So as someone comes in and they stop off at that drop-off location, the drop-off location is made to be the shortest distance for the youngest students to be able to get to the kindergarten play area. Now, from many aspects of public health, this makes a lot of sense. It should reduce the potential for any sort of collision, or an incident like that. However, it is putting these kindergarten students who are running around in the morning before they get to school. I've confirmed this with a number of our teacher friends and my wife who teaches kindergarten, that this is part of the outdoor play time that they tend to spend in the morning. And we've co-located the kindergarten play area right beside the drop-off location. And so this is actually the most interesting piece that we didn't really expect to come across when we started this research, that it's these kindergarten play areas that are probably suffering the worst effects. They're located right where the highest concentrations are occurring. And they are the people that are at the greatest risk. The kindergarten kids have the smallest body mass. They tend to be breathing in the most air relative to that body mass. They're active, and they tend to sometimes, this is not a very formal survey, but just in our discussions, they may spend an hour in the morning running around in this play area before they begin their day inside. So this is something that has really come up as one of our concerns about what's going on here. The students who are playing in the playground, they're not really being affected the same way as this higher at-risk group already is being exposed to these elevated concentrations. Now, kind of coming up to about half an hour here, so kind of wrap it up. when we talk about mitigation, number one thing, and Green Communities Canada is working on this, lots of people are doing great efforts of this, is encouraging active transportation. Lots of health benefits from getting children moving. It's also just going to reduce the number of vehicles. We do know in Canada that our population is becoming more and more urbanized. So in theory, we do have more people that are within a walking distance of the school. We're not seeing, generally speaking, that uptake that we would expect. A second piece is the design of these drop-off locations. They have been particularly in respect to the kindergarten play area. They've been co-located to reduce that walking distance. However, what's happening is the highest concentrations are occurring right near, in most cases, or in many cases, where those kindergarten play areas are. We really suggest in our work to offset these locations. We know it doesn't take great distances. We see the playground, having much smaller, concentrations than even the front door of the school that's nearer to the drop-off program. I think the best, and probably the most difficult one to implement, would be encouraging people to walk the last few hundred meters. I was in a meeting with the Ministry of Education not too long ago, and this idea of a vehicle or pollution exclusion zone has come up, where we exclude vehicles from driving right beside the school and encourage them to park, shut their vehicle off, and either have the student walk to school or walk with the student if the parents aren't comfortable. So these are our three pieces, and there's lots of activities for at different levels that need to be thought of. But right now, my biggest concern coming out of this research, which is actually driving some of our future work, is this co-location of the drop-off programs and the kindergarten play areas. We looked at one pollutant, particulate matter. Now, we know vehicles, they have a mix of different pollutants. Okay, there's nitrogen oxides. There's lots of different pollutants that are coming out of that tailpipe. We expect to see very similar results. There's not much, there's nothing that suggests anything different. The greatest effect is occurring during the colder months. And that's not, and we didn't really find a change in the number of vehicles. It's just the air tends to be stagnated. We don't get the same dispersion of pollution in the colder months. Air tends to build up. And depending on where you are, if you're in an area where we use a lot of wood heating, we might already have elevated concentrations as well. I said I would get back to this about our original plan, which was to do some monitoring at the schools with this van. And what we observed was once we were there, people changed their behavior. And we also observed this even when we were counting vehicles. Our students would be on the other side of the school street, just kind of on public property, counting vehicles. And a number of parents would come up to them saying, are you working with the police? Are you giving tickets? And it all makes us start to think about that people probably know that they shouldn't be idling their vehicle in this drop-off program. They seem to be aware that what they are doing has this negative effect. However, unless they are policed or overseen, they're not willing to change their behavior. But they rapidly do change their behavior once we add some sort of external stimulus, either observing pollution or we've seen programs where children go and write tickets to parents who are idling in front of the school. It's not a real ticket, but it's more of an information pamphlet saying, when you're idling here, you're generating pollution that is affecting us at the school. So this is something that is a behavioral issue that can be changed. I just need to acknowledge, our partners in this program. Funding, large source of funding has come from the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change. Clean Air Hamilton and Hamilton Public Health, they have been fantastic supporters of this research and lots of different air pollution studies that have occurred in Hamilton. My co-author, Dennis Core, from Core Research, who helped with a lot of this work, and then the McMaster Institute for Transportation and Logistics. before I finish up, particularly with the group of people that we have on the phone, or on the computer, I guess, I wanted to talk about what I want to begin with next. So this study we modeled. It was a model. We couldn't observe the air pollution concentrations. The equipment was too large and we couldn't do it. In the last couple of years, we've had substantial technological increases in air pollution monitors. They've shrunken down to a much smaller package. And we're interested, starting in September, I'm looking for some partners who are interested in having some of these small monitors located in and around their school to see what's happening throughout the day. These would be real-time monitors collecting minute-by-minute pollution concentrations to see if, to validate what's going on here, as well to see if there's some sort of recommendation we can make about when students should be outside, specifically in those kindergarten play areas. Maybe the pollution tends to stay around for the first 2 hours of the day and then it dissipates. So if you are interested in working with me, we're going to start some pilot studies in September. My email address is there. So I'm going to end it there. I think we're going to go on to questions now. And thank you for your time. And I look forward to the questions here.
Thank you very much, Matt. That was fantastic. Okay, so it looks like there's already some interest from Kingston in your upcoming research.
Perfect.
Do you have a geographic focus for that? Is it anywhere in Ontario or somewhere within a radius of?
Anywhere within Ontario is fine, actually. Ideally we want to start in September at a few schools and then parlay this into a larger Ontario-wide study, because we do understand you're going to have different effects in somewhere Western Ontario versus Thunder Bay versus here in the GTA. So,
So you're looking for that variety.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I think we'll start with the first question that we received, and that was about wanting to know more about what information is available to school communities in terms of air quality in their local area. So we understand that Health Canada has there is an air quality index. There's an app available that can give you updates on air quality in your area. Do you know anything about that, of how specific it is and how useful it might be as part of sort of active school travel initiatives and anti-idling initiatives?
For sure. The Air Quality Health Index is fantastic. That's how I'll begin. My work, some of our other research projects have been trying to understand how we can take the air quality index. So how it's formulated, it's a concoction of pollutants that comes up with a number from 1 to 10, and then there's a greater than 10. 10 or the plus being the highest or the highest risk. So that is estimated for either a city or a major urban area. So unfortunately, other than just a broad general effect, it doesn't capture the local effects that are occurring within the city. And this is part of our work, is trying to understand this, because we've observed, if between cities, if we see 50% change increase between two cities, for example, we find within the city it can be 1,000 times variation. I've been talking with some schools, one school specifically, to some parents who are in the Ottawa region, and their school is right adjacent to is it the 417 or the 416 there, and their Ottawa, the AQHI value could be low, but the concentrations at that school could be very different depending on what is going on the highway. So as a general piece of advice, it is very helpful. If you want to know about the specific conditions in a local area, it doesn't get that deep. I will plug our website that we've been working on. It's going to be going through a revamp. It's Hamilton AQHI.com. You can just search Hamilton AQHI. And this has been our first attempt at really trying to map out differences in the air quality health index. And we get down, to a scale of about 1 kilometer grids in that. So it's a great app for understanding general air quality, and if it does have a high value, take that, and that is important to understand, and change your activity for the day, but it won't capture these local effects.
Okay, great, thank you. I mean, that kind of tied in with the question I had of how easy is it for a school community to self-implement any air quality monitoring? One of the questions from our audience is whether you've heard of a device that's called from safecast.org that can aid in research. I know you mentioned that technology has been developing. Whether there's anything that's more accessible at the school level for local.
Well, if you are at a school, get in touch with me, and I have monitors here, and we can set something up. I am interested in collecting this data. You have to be very careful. There have become, with these technology increases, there has unfortunately become a lot of very poor quality monitors on the network. Available for monitoring. So I'm not as familiar with safecast.org, but the one that we use for Particulate Matter, which shows very good agreement to the Ministry of the Environment, Environment Canada, and EPA's methods, is known as the Purple Air 2. And if you are interested in this is a real-time monitor. This is one of the monitors we would be setting up at a school. So if you are interested in understanding what's going on at your school, starting before September, get in touch, and I can come out, we can set something up. And that way we can make sure that you're getting accurate data as well.
Fantastic, that sounds exciting. Okay. Another question for you is, how far away from the school, from the entrance, from the kindergarten area, how far away do cards need to be in order to ensure that they have safe air, and then that the vehicles are not having an impact on air quality?
So it's going to be somewhat dependent on how the school is designed and the prevailing winds. However, generally speaking, you will notice a significant decrease in air pollution about 300-400 meters from that source. If you do know the prevailing winds, for example, what I suggest when I do talk to people who are thinking about designing these is think about putting the pollution downwind of the school itself. Locate the vehicles on the downwind side so the wind blows the pollution away from the school. So that is one way to look at it. So I would say, it's not perfect, but if you can get 200, 300, 400 meters, the further the better. But we do notice pretty significant decreases in this pollution because it rapidly disperses with distance of a few hundred meters.
Okay, great, thank you.
So another question was wondering if you're able to segregate private vehicles versus school buses and the comparative impacts in terms of the particulate matter.
Okay, so for this study, we looked only at private vehicles. We do know there's been a number of studies that there is significant effects on air quality from buses as well. So these increases that we're observing are solely from private vehicles. As we move forward in this research, once we observe what's going on locally, we can then subtract out the private vehicles, subtract out the background, and work out kind of the different components. But both of these are contributing to increases in air pollution for sure. Definitely, since we use diesel buses, this is a problem, especially a lot of them, they tend to idle at the school, we observed as well. And that is, if someone makes the argument, and I've done some work on this, if they're idling for more than a minute, even in a diesel bus, it's worthwhile to shut it off. So there's really no argument even for a diesel engine to idle because diesel engines are so efficient that they don't warm up anyway unless they're driving. So school buses are another piece that is definitely increasing the pollution. But I think that's one thing that hopefully is a bit more manageable as you can just have the school buses make sure they don't idle and park a little bit further away when they're dropping off the children.
Okay, thank you. I know that some in the audience are interested to think about what strategies can be effective to get school staff and principals educated about this information and help them to be part of making changes. Have you any thoughts on that based on your interactions at the school level?
I have found very positive responses from everyone. So that is a good thing. I think the number one thing is the teachers are the ones who are standing right by these drop-off areas and making them more aware of what's going on. You know, that is always one of the easiest arguments that I find, is saying, you know, if these drop-off programs, especially if they're done poorly, are increasing the pollution right where you are and where your students are. Most of the time, teachers are very not aware, but they're very open to hearing about these issues. So I think it's just starting the discussion is really what you need to do. If it's parent council or with other colleagues, just talking about these potential issues, because for the most part, no one wants this exposure. So.
All right, so this leads into another similar question. So the question, Leslie is saying that this data seems like it would be useful to drive sensible policy and practice around the design of schools and scheduling playtime. But the one concern is, if you share this data with parents, will this be a concern and impact their parents' comfort of letting their children play outside? So knowing that all this pollution's there, it might make parents drive even more.
That is...
This is...
No, it's actually a really great comment. It's one of the things that we have, when people start cycling, when you're trying to start a cycling culture in an area, unfortunately, the front runners there are still going to be exposed to increased risk of collision as before you really get a critical mass. For the most part, children tend to want to stay away from areas that have increased pollution. What we see is that even when they're making their decision on how to walk to school, if they have the option of walking directly beside a major road, or if they have an option of taking a longer route that passes through a park and maybe goes along some trails, they tend to take those longer routes as they're both more pleasurable. That's really where it's coming from, and it results in a lower amount of pollution. This data is, my study's available. Now, I have, I've given this talk a number of times. I'm willing to share it with really anyone who's willing to listen. And it has, it was in the news for around September of this past year on a number of different news channels. So the information's getting out there. It's difficult. My job is not, unfortunately, really well set up for the communication of this, within the schools. I can only talk to so many people.
Thank you, Matt. And I guess that's a good time to say that we're working on developing some more materials related to this subject. And one of those things was to create an infographic sheet that would capture, some of these key messages and key findings. So we will be working with Matt on that and have that available online soon. I'm just looking at whether we have any more questions coming in here. Yeah, so it's just a comment really from the audience saying that in some municipalities, the kiss and ride system is promoted to schools as an engineering or traffic management response with no recognition of the environmental or health impacts.
Yes, and that's what we've been observing, and it makes sense. Collisions are a very immediate issue, and without a kiss and ride program, there can be chaos at the school. I think there is just some ways we can think about it. Multiple drop-off points, having 2 lanes versus 1, can quickly reduce the amount of congestion in that area. There's definitely some things that can be thought about. But yeah, the people aren't necessarily thinking about these externalities of air pollution exposure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so Sandra Jones is just obviously she's recommending that, like you say, that it really use this kind of information to review and consider the routes that children are using to get to school, including how do they access the school site, and are there routes at the back of the school that could be away from the vehicles, and that has multiple benefits, not just air quality, but just interaction with vehicles in the first place too. So
Yeah.
that was a good consideration.
No, that's a great point. That's something also that really needs parent council driven change, because what we know, or what I've become aware of, is many of these schools are now fenced off. You know, they have fences and they will have openings in the fences, but those tend to be locked. So, you know, students unfortunately really may only have one entrance to many of these schools, which is through the front. For other reasons and other concerns that are very valid, but you know, it's often difficult to get students to take different routes around the school depending on how it's built.
Yeah, definitely. One other question that we had, Matt, was so you mentioned that the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change has funded your research to date. Do you report back to the ministry on your findings, and do you know whether whether they do anything with this information? Is it something that ministry is might take action on?
So yes, they receive a report of all of this. I don't really know internally how it would be. See, there's kind of a disconnect between the Ministry of the Environment, who funds this type of research to understand, and then the Ministry of Education, that's really probably more responsible for the management of the schools. And you know, there's silos where there's not necessarily always a breakdown in communication. My goal is just to keep research, as we learn more and more, researching these issues, and now really starting to work with more schools on a larger area to try and gain more of this knowledge to allow us. Right now, my work, unfortunately, I don't think we're further enough along to really get at the policy issue. And that's sort of what we want to do next, with really the very localized monitoring, to be able to understand what types of policies could we implement. And I think that might be more helpful for actually allowing this change to occur.
Definitely. Great. Well, we look forward to really hearing more about your work in the future, and there's definitely a few people on the line today who are interested in being part of your future work. So we will watch that with interest. Thank you very much for your presentation today. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you. I really thanks for everyone who joined, and please do get in touch. I am looking for schools to start doing some monitoring in September to try and understand. And if you are interested, I'm here to chat. So, or if you have other questions, feel free to send me an email. I can definitely share these slides. I don't know how. I just saw the last question. Maybe.
We can post a copy of your slides online, and we intended to, obviously, we're recording this webinar and post a recording of the webinar too.
Perfect. Yeah, I will. I'm open to sharing the slides, definitely. So we will figure that out.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Matt. I think that concludes our webinar for today. Thanks everybody who joined us. I'm just trying to get to the right slide. There we go. Okay, so that's all. Thank you very much, and we'll have all of the materials online, and we'll be producing some fact sheets, posters, and infographics around pollution around schools very soon. Hope you all have a great day. Thanks. Bye bye.